We have Ashima Narain. Ashima, welcome, Ashima.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. So, Ashima, you've traveled the length and breadth of WaterAid's project. You've covered WASH. Just to tell everyone that Ashima is also a mentor for WaterAid's photography fellowship. It's called the WASH Photo Project, where we mentor, young photographers and lead them into the space of water sanitation and hygiene, and they experience it, while documenting stories. And Ashma, you have a lot of stories, even before COVID hit us, hygiene, water, and how it affects lives in so many ways. Would you want to talk about that? How is it now? In terms of how visual, narratives, just a picture is making, powerful statements.
I mean, I think so many things about this, Nandita. I mean, before I started working on sanitation and hygiene with WaterAid, just as a person, a lay person, I would say, who's not thinking about it constantly, you don't actually understand how intrinsically and how much we take this for granted. And once you actually start to, like for me, when I started to document, uh, sanitation and hygiene in rural areas, you really start looking everywhere. Like you're like, okay, I'm in this area now. Where are the septic tanks? Where are the water tanks? How are they getting the water? You're constantly trying to piece together people's lives based on their access to water and how they go to that, how they go to the toilet. It's a very bizarre way to think, but it's such a basic fundamental issue that we all need to be much more cognizant of. And I think that's really what it taught me to do. And the other thing that, what I started to look for is what sort of toilets are available, because you started to see a lot of toilets coming up. But what was the type of toilet that was there? I remember, I think on my first assignment, I was at a school where they had built these toilets, and there was a huge line of young girls standing outside the toilet. And I have a picture where the girl who's right in front is looking back, and she's just terrified to step into that toilet because she wants to go, but there's no water in the toilet. And the toilets that have been constructed, there's no commode. They're literally, it's just a flat piece of cement. And so if you're even the second person to go in there barefoot, you're stepping into somebody else's urine.
Right.
What is this design? Who has designed this? So it really, what you start to consider really is who is worth having dignity for, really? Who is designing these types of toilets? And, so these were things that really start to open your eyes, that we can talk about having toilets, we can talk about dignity, we can talk about all these things, but the design of it, the proximity of it, the access of water. You can't talk about sanitation unless you talk about water. And how many people have access to water? So these were really the things, like when you're talking about communication or talking about photography. For me, what's happened, I mean, I can't even talk so much about other people's behavior change, but your own behavior change starts to be that you're looking constantly and you're trying to connect the dots on how our lifestyles impact other people's lifestyles, even though we might not be near each other in any way in terms of distance. I know I didn't answer your question. Sorry.
No, but no, but what you said is true. Like those of us who have access to water sanitation, hygiene, are quite oblivious that it is not there for millions of people out there and how it affects them, right? And like you mentioned that children standing in line waiting just to go to a toilet, which is not even a proper toilet at the end of the day because it's not being constructed well.
Other thing, sorry to interrupt you, but just for the other thing which was quite interesting to me was when I started to look at how children are being taught to wash their hands, like this. They were things that I had not considered. And, we as educated people, we just go and we wash our hands like that. And that's it. But it was something else that I learned. So I have come back, and now all my children, they wash their hands like this, which has been taught to me by children in rural, marginalized areas. So, I think there's a lot of give and take which happens in this.
And the pandemic has made hygiene and hand washing and the steps of hand washing, for 20 seconds, which everybody's been stressing on for years, very critical right now. I also want to focus on how, how visual communication is taking shape, once the pandemic is hit, and how it's how water and sanitation and hygiene issues are being represented while we are in a lockdown, right? So and people, now they are not able to go out, but there's a lot of interpretation happening on how you're coping with lockdowns. How are these issues being treated visually?
I mean, I think and I hope, honestly, that uh, through this situation, and also but once we come out of it, there will be, visuals will really help to create much more what I would like to call environmental and water literacy, because that is really what we need. Often, I mean, for any kind of visual communication, honestly, for it to be impactful and effective, it has to just connect to another person at an emotional level. That is really the most basic level. So if someone can see something in a visual that is familiar to you, or not necessarily visually, but emotionally familiar to you, then it will be impactful. And I think what has happened through this pandemic is that it because it's such an inclusive disease, that it doesn't necessarily spare anyone. Everyone is in it together, so we all have to learn how to work through this together. I think people are being more considered, and they are thinking about things and being a little bit more reflective than they have been in the past. And hopefully that will also translate into action. Uh, I mean, I don't know when this post-COVID world will start, but even now in our daily actions, that we are more considered about our consumption all around, not just with water. Um, and I think visuals will always play a large role in that, because visuals really equals emotions, and if you don't have the feelings to do anything, it's never going to translate into an action or a thought.
Another thing I wanted to discuss with you is that we rely on photographers like you, the media, on campaigners from the advertising world, from communication world, to put out material, and suddenly you see a photograph, or you see an artwork, and you see, okay, these are issues on water, sanitation, or hygiene that are being presented, or but I think what the pandemic has done, that everybody is starting to become conscious, like you said, and we needn't, it's like what Jitendra was saying, user-generated content. We need to be more aware. We all have mobile phones. We all take pictures all the time. We are all creating visuals and visual art, and there are so many apps. And how do we make people more aware that there are issues that matter, and you can be an advocate for that? There's Instagram, there's so many channels where people can just collectively push conversation and action and advocacy on it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think everything starts from just even wanting to be aware. And once that happens, then it's like dominoes. You can't stop it. Everything. Then you start seeing things like my septic tanks. Now everywhere I go, I look for them. These are things that happen to you. And I think it is important that people start literally looking around places where they live and start thinking about, well, if I'm living like this and I need a tap for cold water and a tap for hot water and a flush, and how many connections do I have and where does my wastewater go?
Right.
And you start thinking about that for other people as well.
Right.
So how does that work? And therefore, how will they get their water? And other things like if I have a certain type of filtration system for my water, how does that actually impact the water table? There are many things that you can do as an individual that impacts other people.
Right.
And it all starts with this germ, this seed, which is born from awareness and the desire to
Right.
become aware.
Right. When we talk about, access, and especially, and we have access, which is maybe at an arm's length, but a lot of women, and the burden falls on women and girls, especially, in urban slums or in rural areas for fetching water, and now with hand washing coming in, and you have to maintain hygiene, and they don't have a tap at home, so it's like more rounds of water to be collected, right? And there's summer coming in, and it affects women in a lot of ways, right? You want to share your experiences on, uh, from the field?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, I would say that, there's so many, most issues that we feel are gender neutral are not.
Mhm.
Even COVID, the way that it's impacting women is actually quite different from how it's impacting men. Um, and this is one of the ways, like exactly what you're saying, is that, it's sort of the same way that climate change impacts women in the sense that they have to travel if in terms of if there's desertification or there's drought or something. Women are the ones who have to travel much further in order to get access to water. Look at the color of this water. I don't know if you guys could see the color of that water, but this is drinking water. This is the water that this whole village drinks because that's the only water that they have access to. And literally, this water is like a tiny, tiny puddle at the bottom of this well. It's so shallow that you can't even put a bucket down. A man has to climb down this sari, which is hanging, in order to get to the bottom and then scoop up the water from the bottom of the well. And that is the water that comes out of it. um, this is not related to women. This is related to the quality of the water that people have to drink. But women are having to travel much further. They have to come back. They have to then here's another picture. And this is another thing, right? For most of India, they have to travel with these huge jerry cans of heavy water through unpaved roads and land in their chappals, but in Ghungat. What is going on? I mean, it's just like if it wasn't hard enough, let's also put them in Ghungat and make them walk on like unpaved roads. So these are all the things that I've seen. Here's another. This is on water testing. This picture, which is where they are being taught how to actually test the water and see if it's potable, etc. Um, but the other thing that's interesting, that was very interesting for me, was how women, who are the ones who have to go out and collect the water, so they actually know how much water there is. They know when is the best time to go and collect the water. This picture I like because you see the woman who's carrying the heavy water, and her young sons are sitting there on a mobile phone, not even thinking, oh, let's help my mom carry this heavy water. And this you see across India, that men will just be sitting there watching their mothers, their sisters, their wives work. This I have seen. But anyway, what I was trying to say is that the women who know about the water, they know where the water is. They also know very often which is the water that is potable and which isn't. I had seen like in one community action where they had made rangoli on the floor, and they had made crosses on the water areas which people shouldn't go to as a means to try and educate as to where to go and not. There was another community action that happened where a group of women got together and they went to the sarpanch and the gram panchayat, etc., and they said, look, we need to be able to control the switch of the pump,
Yeah,
which
right.
they have not been able to control because some man who's sitting in the house watching his mobile while the women are working and waiting for the pump to, to be switched on, would just be standing there in the heat. But finally, because they rallied together, they created a self-help group, they managed to get a switch that they are able to control.
Incorporate and yeah.
Can you imagine how much energy and effort has gone into this to get one switch for a pump for water that they only have to get?
Right.
It's just like it's mind-boggling.
True. We'll just take up a comment that's come from Azera, that how do you move, sorry, how do you move from fear as a push factor to practice hygiene practices, to being more responsible, not just for yourself, but for others' safety? How do you build that collective feel of responsibility? How do you think we can do that through visuals, through photographs?
I mean, again, I think so much of it is based on a common and shared emotion that we have to have. And it's a collective responsibility. What COVID has showed us is that you can't work in a silo, you can't work in isolation. Oh, but I'm so clean, therefore I can't get infected. It doesn't work like that, right? We all have to work together in order for this to actually be overcome and to have any kind of impactful outreach. Is that we are a collective and we have to have that sense of collective responsibility. And I think visuals, I keep saying it, visuals, because of the familiarity, because of the understanding, but because of the emotional connect we can have with each other, that is the
The power.
best and only means of communication as far as I'm concerned.
That's true. I'll stop here, Ashima. We have to be conscious of time. But
Yes.
thank you so much for joining us. And yes, you have lots of stories from the field on water, sanitation, hygiene. And we do hope that the stories that you've captured before, and and other photographers and fellows as they're capturing, they bring out these stories even now, which are so relevant because and COVID has made them more relevant now with hand washing and water being so critical right now. Right. Thank you so much. I'll move on to the next session. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.